The wind came from the north that night, low and cold, as if dragged from the belly of a grave. Captain Elias Varnell rode at the head of a weary column. 14 men, 30 miles from Fort Keogh, the sky brittle with ice. They'd come upon a rise littered with splintered poles and charred stones. The burial ground, said Black Elk, had been disturbed. Not by men of his tribe, but by soldiers before them. The men laughed nervously, yet no one dismounted. As darkness folded over the plains, the first sound rose. A keening cry carried on the gale, long and hollow, neither wind nor human. Varnell barked for silence, but the echoes mocked him, repeating every command in a voice not his own. By midnight, the men had built a small fire near the ridge, though few dared sleep. The cold seemed alive, whispering through the gaps in their coats. Jonah Pike claimed he heard someone calling his name, first softly, then in chorus. Varnell dismissed it as windplay, yet even he glanced often toward the dark mounds. The night was too still. Even the horses stood wide-eyed, their ears flicking toward a sound no one wished to acknowledge. When the fire cracked, a voice slipped through the hiss. A woman's cry, faint, drawn from beneath the snow. Dr. Hensley took out her notebook, her breath misting the pages as she tried to transcribe what she heard. Oral distortion, she wrote, whined resonance through the ravine, yet the ink trembled, bleeding across the paper as the wind seemed to imitate her own breathing. She looked up, startled. A shadow moved just beyond the firelight, tall and slow, vanishing as soon as she stood. "Captain," she whispered, "there's someone here." The ridge began to hum, not loudly, but low and deep, a vibration beneath their boots that made the air pulse. Black Elk rose, whispering in Lakota, his voice barely audible over the rhythmic thrum. "They're awake," he said. Varnell ordered the men to stand ready, but when they aimed their rifles toward the hill, the sound ceased. In its place came the heavy, shuddering quiet that follows thunder, and a single distant voice, "Go back!" When dawn finally broke, it came without warmth. The sky was the color of old bone, the wind hollow and relentless. The men packed quickly, eyes fixed anywhere but the ridge. As they rode toward Fort Keogh, the sound followed. Faint but certain, woven into the wind like a song without words. Captain Varnell turned once more toward the burial ground, and for a moment he thought he saw movement among the stones. Figures standing still, watching, their forms melting back into the snow. Fort Keogh rose like a frozen scar upon the prairie, timber walls half buried in snow, smoke rising in weak, defeated threads. Inside, the soldiers tried to forget the cries from the ridge, but the sound seemed to follow, echoing through the barracks at night. Captain Elias Varnell walked the perimeter before dawn, sleep-deprived and pale. The men avoided his gaze. In the mess hall, Private Jonah Pike refused to eat, claiming he'd seen faces in the frost-covered windows. Dr. Clara Hensley dismissed it as exhaustion, yet her own reflection wavered strangely that morning, as though someone else were looking back from behind her eyes. Private Pike awoke screaming in the barracks, his hands clawing at the air. The men gathered, faces pale in the lantern glow, as he muttered through sobs about a woman standing at his bedside, whispering his name. No one believed him until they saw the frost etched upon the wood, the faint outline of a hand pressed from the inside. Dr. Clara Hensley examined the frost mark with scientific precision, noting its perfect human shape and the residual cold it radiated. She turned to Varnell, insisting it was condensation frozen by uneven temperature. Yet when she pressed her palm beside it, the mark beneath hers remained colder still. For the first time, her calm faltered, reason itself beginning to thin like ice beneath weight. That night, the fort's horses shrieked from the stables, an awful, twisting sound that dragged every soldier from sleep. When they arrived, The animals thrashed in panic, eyes rolling white, their bodies drenched in icy sweat. The lantern light flickered across the rafters, revealing shapes that moved where no shadows should. Black Elk stood in the doorway, silent, his face carved with grief. "They are not angry," he said quietly. "They are lost." Colonel Abram Holt ordered the burial site sealed, and every man sworn to silence. But silence could not bind the unseen. As the men turned in that night, the wind began to hum again, low and mournful, threading through the fort's chimneys and corridors. Varnell stood by his window, gazing at the dark prairie, hearing faint whispers rise like prayers. He muttered to himself, "It's just the wind." Yet when he turned away, his reflection did not move. The air turned brittle with foreboding. Beneath Fort Keogh's frozen yard, Black Elk guided Captain Varnell and Dr. Hensley toward the old earthworks that predated the fort's foundations. Lanterns hissed as they descended into the frost-lined hollow, their breath clouding before them. "This place remembers," Black Elk said softly. Varnell's boots crunched on bone before he realized what he'd stepped upon. A rib, polished white and thin as porcelain. Around them lay the remnants of another massacre, long forgotten, buried under military stone and arrogance. Clara knelt to touch a skull's fractured crown. A chill passed through her hand like a living pulse. "They were never buried," she whispered. Outside, snow fell without sound. Colonel Holt ordered the excavation halted, unwilling to believe his post sat atop an unburied massacre. Yet the fort groaned that night, timbers shifting as if the ground beneath strained against what lay suppressed. Varnell found his boots dusted with ash, though the fires had gone cold hours before. He did not sleep. Instead, he listened, and beneath the silence he heard breathing. Dr. Hensley began recording the sounds at night, using her medical phonograph, a relic of the war. On the cylinder, the playback was faint at first. The sigh of wind, the creak of beams. Then came a woman's voice whispering in Lakota, repeating 3 words neither she nor Varnell could translate. When played again, the whisper shifted, speaking Varnell's name instead. The doctor's hands trembled as she stopped the cylinder, staring at him in disbelief. "How would they know your name?" By dawn, Black Elk led them beyond the fort's palisade to the ridge once more. The storm had softened the land, but the burial ground now pulsed faintly with light beneath the snow. A breathing glow that spread as they watched. "The bones beneath us remember the sound of war," he said. "They cry because the land cannot forget." Varnell fell to one knee. Overcome, his hand trembling against the frozen soil, the sound returned. Hundreds of voices whispering through one another, a choir of the lost. That evening, the fort's chapel bell rang, though no hand pulled the rope. Men rushed to see the tower swaying gently, its bell tolling slow and uneven, each strike echoing deeper than metal should allow. Varnell climbed to the belfry, lanterns swinging. There, carved into the wood, he found words written in Lakota, and beneath them, in English, a single phrase newly etched by some unseen hand. "We remember you." The thaw came early and wrong. Ice broke from the Yellowstone River in black slabs that drifted past the fort, and the water ran red at sunrise. Rust first, then crimson. The soldiers stood at the banks in silence, rifles forgotten as a coppery mist rose from the current. Captain Elias Varnell whispered that the river carried memory. Black Elk said it carried grief. By midday, the mist thickened, curling through camp like breath from a dying lung. Every sound within it echoed twice, once from the mouth that spoke, and again from something unseen, answering back in sorrow. Colonel Holt ordered a quarantine of the riverbank, forbidding anyone to drink or approach. Yet the men swore they heard voices from the fog calling their names. Private Pike wandered too close at dusk. When Varnell found him, Pike stood knee-deep in the current, eyes glassy, whispering softly to the water as if consoling it. When they dragged him back to shore, his hands bled from gripping the ice, Between his trembling lips came a single word: "Forgive." Dr. Clara Hensley took samples of the water by lamplight. Under her magnifying lens, it shimmered with movement, not biological, but rhythmic, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. "It's not water," she murmured. Its memory turned liquid. As she spoke, the lamp flickered. In the glass vial, faint faces formed and faded, the dead suspended in their own remembering. When she looked up, Varnell was watching her, his expression the calm of a man unraveling. That night, thunder rolled, though the sky remained clear. The red mist grew thick, swirling through the fort's yard until the world seemed drowned in blood-tinted vapor. Men stumbled, shouting names of lost family. Others fell to their knees in prayer. Black Elk stood at the heart of the storm, chanting low and rhythmic. From the mist, forms began to take shape. Translucent soldiers in torn blue coats, their faces hollow, marching without sound toward the river. Varnell watched as one turned its eyeless gaze upon him. By dawn, the river had stilled. The mist was gone, but the color remained, staining the stones and the soldiers' memories alike. Colonel Holt found Varnell standing at the river's bend, hat in hand, staring into the mirror still current. "Sir," Holt called, "the men need orders." Varnell didn't turn. "They already have them," he said softly. "They're just not from me." As the sun rose, the water reflected not the sky, but the faces of the dead. Serene now, as though finally heard. Sleep became dangerous. Men woke screaming from dreams that bled into waking hours, unable to tell which world they stood in. Captain Elias Varnell stopped keeping a watch. He simply wandered the fort's walls at night, lantern in hand, as snow fell in silent, deliberate spirals. In the distance he saw soldiers marching, hundreds of them, pale and soundless, uniforms torn, rifles glinting faintly beneath a moon like hammered silver. Yet when he blinked, they were gone, and the silence returned heavier than before. The line between life and memory had thinned to a veil as fragile as frost on glass. Dr. Clara Hensley's notes became illegible, her once steady script trembling into loops and fractures. She had begun to hear faint harmonies under the wind, voices humming through the fort's timbers. At first, she believed it imagination born of exhaustion, but soon the melody grew distinct, layered with sorrow and strength. Black Elk told her to listen, not with ears, but with her spirit. "They sing for release," he said, and she realized the voices were not only Lakota. Among them, she heard the accents of soldiers long dead, their grief interwoven. Black Elk prepared a ritual to open the passage between worlds, not to banish, but to speak. The fort's chapel became the circle. He drew symbols in ash and crushed sage, the air thick with burning cedar. Varnell, Pike, and Hensley stood within the ring, each holding something belonging to the dead. A button, a bullet, a braid of hair. "They do not wish revenge," Black Elk murmured. "They wish remembrance." When he began to chant, the walls trembled, and a soft rain of dust fell like falling stars. The air shimmered. One by one, forms began to take shape. Men, women, and children, their bodies translucent yet vivid with memory. The soldiers of the fort fell to their knees, some praying, others weeping. Clara's trembling hand reached toward the spirit of a Lakota woman whose face seemed carved from sorrow itself. "We hear you," Clara whispered. The woman's eyes met hers. The sound that followed was neither scream nor song, but something between. A release carried on wind and light. When the chanting ended, the world felt lighter. The storm outside eased into calm. Varnell sank to the chapel floor, whispering the names of his fallen men. Black Elk stood over him, silent and spent. Hensley closed her eyes and heard nothing. No screams, no wind, only quiet. Private Pike wept openly, clutching his harmonica. When he raised it to his lips, the tune that came was soft, trembling and pure. A lullaby the spirits seemed to carry away into dawn. Morning came in silence so deep it felt sacred. Yet beneath that hush, Fort Keogh trembled with dread. Colonel Abram Holt had grown desperate. He ordered the burial grounds destroyed, believing fire and steel could end what prayers could not. Captain Elias Varnell protested, his voice rough with sleeplessness. "You'll burn what's already forgiven," he warned. But Holt's eyes held only fear disguised as authority. The command was given. At dawn, they would ride with shovels and kerosene to cleanse the ridge. The air itself seemed to recoil, waiting. The soldiers rode in silence, torches guttering against a rising wind. When they reached the burial ground, the snow had melted in strange circles, revealing dark soil and pale bone beneath. Holt dismounted first, striking his torch against the nearest effigy. The flame caught fast, too fast. A crimson plume surged skyward, illuminating the men's faces as the ground began to moan. Black Elk's cry broke through the wind. "You wake what cannot die." The earth split open with a roar that drowned thought. From the fissures rose a storm of light, not fire, but memory, unbound. Shapes of the lost surged through the haze. Soldiers, women, children, their cries woven into one immense lament. The men fell to their knees, weapons forgotten. Dr. Clara Hensley ran toward the breach, hair whipping wild, shouting above the din. "They are not vengeful," she screamed. "They're asking to be seen." Varnell, eyes wet, understood. The ritual was incomplete. The living had to answer. Varnell turned toward Black Elk, voice breaking through the storm. "Finish it," he said. Black Elk's chant rose again, deeper, older, the sound of centuries bending back upon themselves. Varnell stepped into the breach, boots sinking into glowing soil. The spirits reached for him not to harm, but to welcome. His face softened in surrender. "Tell them we heard," he whispered to Hensley. Then the light swallowed him, brilliant and absolute. The sound of his breath fading into the wind's lament. When the light dimmed, only stillness remained. The ground sealed itself, the flames extinguished. Snow began to fall. Soft, slow, cleansing. Black Elk stood at the edge of the scar, head bowed in prayer. "Doctor?" Hensley held Varnell's revolver, its metal cool and empty. Holt knelt nearby, the fire of command gone from his eyes. "He gave himself to end it," she said quietly. The wind carried her words into silence, and somewhere beyond hearing, a final whisper answered, "Thank you." Spring crept over Fort Keogh like an apology. Snow receded from the hillsides, revealing grass the color of tarnished gold. The air no longer carried the echo of screams, only the rustle of thaw and the hush of wind through open doors. The fort stood half-abandoned now, its walls weathered, its banners gone. Clara Hensley remained, writing by lantern light in the command office, her notes a testament to everything they could not explain. She wrote of courage and consequence, of men who listened too late, and of spirits that had only wanted to be remembered. Outside, the land had softened. The burial ground lay quiet beneath a veil of wild flowers, purple, white, and pale red, like diluted blood. Black Elk visited once more before departing north, leaving a bundle of sage and a carved feather atop the mounds. "They are home now," he said simply. Clara watched him fade into the prairie horizon, his figure swallowed by the endless light. She knew the spirits would follow him, not in haunting, but in peace. Colonel Holt remained for a time, his command stripped to ceremony. He walked the fort's perimeter daily, his shoulders stooped beneath invisible weight. One morning he paused by the chapel door and touched the scorched wood where Varnell had stood his last. "I was wrong," he murmured to no one. The wind passed through the open door like a sigh. Neither forgiveness nor judgment, only acknowledgement. Dr. Hensley packed her journals into a canvas satchel and sealed the office for the last time. As she crossed the yard, she heard a faint sound. A harmonica's whisper carried on the wind. It was the tune Private Pike had played during the ritual, fragile but pure. She stopped, listening. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from the living and the dead alike. Her lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "He's still playing," she said softly and kept walking toward the river. At the river's edge, the water ran clear once more, reflecting the clouds like new parchment. Hensley knelt and dipped her hand into the current. It was cold, clean, alive. Somewhere beneath its flow, she felt the faintest pulse, not haunting, but heart. As she stood, wind rippled through the grass, carrying voices too soft to distinguish more sigh than sound. She turned once toward the fort, then to the horizon and walked on. The prairie listened, and for the first time in years, it did not scream.